Hello, preschool. You may recognize where I am right now. I am in our classroom. So before I send all your beautiful artwork home with you, I wanted to take a walk through the Old Testament one more time before I take them off the wall. And then when you share them with your family at home, you'll remember the day that we made these wonderful creations. So speaking of creation, let's start with our beautiful world. Do you see our lovely earth? We started at the very beginning of the Bible, and our first memory verse was Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we began our journey around our classroom with the very first verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, and we made the beautiful earth that God created. Then after that, we talked about the Garden of Eden, and we made these snakes. Do you remember when we made these snakes? And the snakes, they were kind of mean to Adam and Eve, and they tricked them. And the snakes represent some of the troubles and the trials that we're going to run across as we go through our lives. We go through our version of the world. But do we have to worry about those snakes and those evil guys that are going to try to come after us? No way. Just like the snakes are blocked from getting to the earth by a Bible verse, so are the troubles in our world because we have Jesus. And he told us in John 16:33, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So we don't have to worry about the snakes in our lives. Then, do you remember when we made these stars with all these different stars and stars and stars and more stars and stars and stars? We talked about a fellow named Abram, and he was talking to God, and God told him, then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And that's from Genesis 15:5. And after we learned about Abram, well, check this out. Do you remember all these beautiful rainbows we made? Oh my goodness, this was from when we were talking about Noah and his ark. And if you remember, God gave us the rainbow in the sky to be a covenant between the world and God, that never again would he flood the world, the entire world, like he did in Noah's time. And we learned that God always keeps his promises. You're right. Then we went from colorful rainbows to colorful coats. Do you remember Joseph? And Joseph had that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful colored coat, many colored coat. And Joseph got that as a special gift from his dad, which kind of made his brothers mad. So his brothers did some super mean things to him. But did that stop him from being loyal? No way. When his brothers needed help, Joseph came to their rescue. And what we learned from Joseph is, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. So anything that happened, anything somebody tried to do to us, God can make it a good thing. Then, do you remember the day we traced our hands? Because we have how many fingers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fingers. And those 10 fingers we then put on God's commandments. And we know, and God spoke these words. Now, these rules or commandments that God gave us, was that to make our lives hard and make us feel bad? Because, God, we can't live up the way you say we're supposed to? No way. God gave us these rules or commandments to help keep us safe and not to make our lives hard, but to make it better. Then from there, do you remember when we talked about Balaam in the book of Numbers? And Balaam had a donkey that did what? It talked. Now, Balaam wasn't listening to God. And so God sent a messenger to tell him to turn around. But Balaam wasn't listening, was he? But his donkey was. But Balaam kept getting mad at his donkey all the time, and he actually hit him. And his donkey finally said, in words he could understand, "Why do you keep hitting me? I'm just trying to keep you safe." And of course, if your donkey started talking, wouldn't you start listening? I hope so, because that's what happened with Balaam. Then we talked about Ruth and Naomi. And Ruth and Naomi traveled a long, long way. And when they got there, they were super, super hungry. Now, Naomi said, "Ruth, you should stay in that other country and you should just take care of yourself." And Ruth was like, "No way. I'm going to go wherever you go, Naomi." So one day, Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the fields to gather leftover grain behind anyone who will let me do it." And she did. And look at these beautiful baskets of grain that Ruth brought back so she and Naomi could eat. Oh, great work. Nice job. Then we talked about this guy here. This fella was Samuel. Do you remember Samuel? He kept waking up in the night thinking that his master was talking to him. And he'd run over there and he'd say, "Yes, what do you need?" And his master was like, "I didn't call you." And finally, after it kept happening, his master said, "I think God is trying to talk to you." So Samuel said, "Lord, your servant is listening." And that's why we made a super cool servant's heart. So like this one here, Summit, I'm going to pick on you today. It said Summit has a servant's heart and hands for helping. And he made this really cool thing. But this was one of the very first times that Mrs. Ryan asked you to write your own name. And at this time, Summit, you could only make your S's. And I know when we left school, you were making all your letters and your name was beautiful. So it'll be fun for you to take a look at your names and how much better you're doing at making them now that you've had so much practice. And don't forget to always have a servant's heart and hands for helping. Then we talked about this guy here, not the big soldier guy, but the little guy with the slingshot. Do you remember who that is? You're right, that's David and Goliath with big and small. But we know that David was able to use his slingshot to defeat that big giant. And why? Because he trusted in the Lord. And he said, "Lord, the battle is the Lord's." You remember the day we said that? The battle is the Lord's. Say it again. The battle is the Lord's. That's right. And we made our own slingshots. And how many stones did David have? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so we put 5 stones and a slingshot for our slingshots. And we know the battle is the Lord's. And then we learned about a time where the people wanted to find out about who is God, who was the most powerful God. And we learned, "And I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God." You remember they built those altars, and the people that were trying to follow Baal, which why would you do that? And they tried to make their fires start, and they tried and tried and tried, and they couldn't do it. And then they came along and they said, watch this. And so they called out onto the name of the Lord after they had built the fire, the altar. They poured jars and jars of water on it. Do you remember that? And so the wood was all wet, and still God was able to poof, bring down fire on the altar. Not only did he burn the altar, but the rocks too. The crazy stuff that is so hot. So we remember the day that we built the fiery altar because we already know that God is God. We don't have to follow any other silly gods. Then we made jars of oil, and these jars aren't empty, are they? These jars are overflowing, never ending. They just keep going and going and going and going and going. The jars of oil. One day a woman came to Elisha. She was worried. I don't have any money. I need to pay for everything I have. The man I owe is angry, and he will take my 2 sons. He will make them work for him. What can I do? And Elisha asked, what do you have at home? I only have a little oil, she said. And so they prayed to God, and all of a sudden they kept pouring out of the oil. They poured out and they poured out, and it wasn't running out. The jar never got empty. How cool was that? And we come over here and we remember our whole year this year was let your light shine. Remember that always in Matthew 5:16, to let your light shine. And then over here, we have some happy faces and we have some sad faces. Some happy faces and some sad faces. And it says up here, God sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. So we were talking about whether you are happy or whether you are sad, to try to find joy in everything we do, because who cares for us? Who protects us? That's right. And that was out of the book of Job. And Job really had a hard time, didn't he? He lost his family and all his possessions, and he got super sick. But whether he was happy or whether he felt sad, God always loved him and took care of him. And then we wanted to know about the Lord is my shepherd. And so we made these beautiful sheep. Do you see them? You did such a great job with them. And the Lord always takes care of us, just like the shepherd always takes care of the sheep. I like that so much. And then we talked about more fire in the book of Daniel. And we have, if you can see in here, we've got some people in the fire. And these guys got into trouble with the king, not with the Lord, but with the king. And they threw them into the fiery furnace. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were in the fire, and they said, boy, I hope that your God will take care of you now. But didn't I just say that only 3 people were put into the fire? Who is that with them? Look, it's Jesus. Jesus is in the fire with them, protecting them, keeping them safe. And when they came out of that fire, they didn't even smell like smoke. They believed that God would keep his promises and kept them safe. And guess what? He did. He kept them so safe They didn't even smell like smoke. But when the guards came to check in the fire, poof, they were burned up. That's how hot the fire was. But God didn't stop protecting there in the book of Daniel. Daniel got thrown into the lion's den. But it says faith will conquer fear. And do you see any of these lions trying to eat Daniel? Oh no, that's because God kept their mouths closed. They couldn't hurt Daniel because God was with Daniel inside the lion's den. So we made our lions. Do you see our lions? But do you remember what's the one thing our lions are missing? They have eyes. They have a mane. So you cut the beautiful manes in them. See how the mane is? But they have no mouth. That's right. God kept the mouths of the lions shut to keep Daniel safe in the lion's den. So there are no mouths on our lions. And then we ended our journey through the Old Testament with Jonah. And we just talked about Jonah and how he was in trouble. And in trouble, deep trouble, I prayed to God and he answered me. And so here we have our beautiful sea creature. And inside the sea creature is Jonah. And Jonah is doing what? Praying. That's right. Praying. I'm sorry I didn't listen about going to Nineveh. I'm sorry I wasn't obeying you, God. Please, will you help me? And God told the sea creature to take him to the shores of Nineveh, where he was supposed to go, and spit him up on the shore. And that's where he went to warn the people in Nineveh, and he saved them all. And that, my friends, is the story behind all these beautiful artworks that you have been decorating our classroom with all year long. So when you take them out of your bags, you can tell all your family just what we were studying on the day that we made all these cool crafts. Thanks for all your hard work and for your beautiful, beautiful artwork. Bye.